Good morning, guys. We are going to continue with chapter 4, and this kind of switches gears a little bit. The rest of what we're going to do in chapter 4 we will have some proofs with, and we're going to do the same kind of thing a couple different ways. So we're going to talk about congruent triangles. Remember, congruent means that they're the same size. Okay, so same size triangles is what the rest of this chapter is going to be about. Geometric figures are congruent if, this should be an if, change that, if they are the same shape and the same size. So they got to be the same shape. We're obviously all talking about triangles for this, so that's the same shape, but they got to be exactly the same size. Eventually we're going to talk about other figures that are congruent and they got to be the same shape. So we're going to talk about things called corresponding angles and corresponding sides. These are sides and angles in the same place on two different figures. So if we talk about something totally different than what we're going to talk about, like if we talk about a heart like this, and then maybe an upside down heart, we could reference like the pointy part right here. This would be the corresponding pointy part because it is in the same place on two different figures, even though one's upside down. So, two polygons are congruent if and only if their corresponding angles and corresponding sides are congruent. So if I give you these two triangles here, if I tell you that they are congruent, ABC is congruent to DEF, then you know several things. You know the angles in the same spot are congruent. So angle A and angle D are both first, those are congruent. Angle B and angle E are in the middle, those are both congruent. And then we got F and C on the end, those are both congruent. And then same things with side lengths. This down here, this congruence statement, tells you what side lengths are the same. So AB and DE are the same size right here. BC and EF are the same size. And then A to C and D to F are the same size. So this congruent statement down here and this picture tells us what things we know are equal. So if I give you something like this picture right here and tell you that triangle RST is congruent to triangle XYZ, we can identify all the congruent stuff. And to be honest, we don't even really need the picture as long as we have the congruent statement. So the order that we have here is the order that they are congruent. So R comes first on this triangle, and it's congruent to X on this triangle. So angle R is congruent to angle X. Now the thing about this is, if you just look at the picture, we don't really know what's congruent. We got to go by the words here. So the ones in the middle are S and Y. Those are congruent. And then finally, S and Y. The last one is T and Z. Those have to be congruent. Now we got to do the same thing for the side lengths. So remember, we can't really tell from the picture. We're going to use the words up here. So RS and XY have to be the same. RS has to be congruent to XY. And then my next one would be S to T and Y to Z. And then finally, RT and ZX have got to be the same. And we can mark them on here. So RS and XY. And then ST needs 2 and YZ. And then this guy would need 3 here and here. But you need to look at the congruent statement to tell you what things match up. So another type of problem I could give you is one that looks like this, where you got to find some things. So if I tell you that triangle EFH is congruent to triangle GFH, we could do a couple things. We could find the value of X And then we can find angle M or GFH. So let's take a look at this order. E and G have got to be the same. So this one and this one are the same. F and F are the same. So like this guy and this guy are the same. And then it says G and H are the same. Or sorry, H and H are the same. So this guy here. So if I want to find the value of x, x is in this 6x minus 12. This congruent statement right here tells me that this 6x minus 12 has to be 90 degrees. So I can set this equal to 90 and I can solve. We'll add 12 to both sides so we get 102. We can divide both sides by 6. This goes in once with 4 left over, so we get 17 is the value of x. And then it says find the measure of GFH. So G to F to H. We got to find this guy right here. So in order to do that, we need to know a couple angles of the triangle. Right now they tell me that this guy is 21.6. I can figure out this guy right up here, and because of this congruent statement, I know that those two have to be equal. So I have in my triangle here, I know that this one's equal to the one I need to find, so this is what I don't know. This one's 90, because these two have to be equal down here, and this one's at 21.6. So we can find this guy up here. We have x plus 21.6 plus 90 has to add up to 180 degrees. If we add these up and subtract from 180, we end up with about 68.4 degrees. So remember, that's this guy up here, and then our picture or our congruent statement tells us that this angle here and this angle here have to be exactly the same. Alright, this is where we get into the proof stuff. In order to prove that triangles are congruent, we need to prove 6 things. I know it kind of seems like a lot, but this helps us make our proofs. We need to prove that all 3 corresponding sides are congruent and all 3 corresponding angles are congruent. So, if I were to give you this right here, what 6 things do we need to prove that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle MNR? So we need all 3 corresponding sides. So take a look at your picture or your congruent statement to figure out your corresponding sides. So PQ is first. We need to prove that that's congruent to MN because that's first here. Then we need to prove that QR, so the next 2 letters, are congruent to NR, the next 2 letters after that. And then we do it with the P and the R. So I need to prove that PR is congruent to MR. So that's this part right here, that all 3 sides are congruent. Now we got to talk about all 3 angles. So remember, the angles are a little easier because it's just whoever's first and second and second. So angle P has got to be congruent to angle M. Angle Q has got to be congruent to angle N. And then the last one, angle R, has got to be congruent to angle R. So, in order to prove that these are congruent, you need 6 different things. So when we go to prove something, you should have at least 6 different things here. So, let's do a proof. Remember, for all of our proofs, we have our 2 columns with statements, and then reasons, let's write down our givens. Angle P and angle M are right angles. And then we have R is the midpoint of PM. And we have PQ congruent to MN. And finally, QR is congruent to NR. All of these things are given. So, if we go back up here to the things that we need, same picture that we're using here. So the information they give us is P and M are right angles. So we can see that in the picture. Right angle, right angle. They tell us R is the midpoint of PM, so this is right in the middle here. Tells me that PQ and MN are the same, and that QR and NR are the same. So QR and NR are the same. So now remember, we need all 6 of these things here before we can prove that these are congruent. So let's see what we have. So far we have PQ and MN are the same, so there's one thing. We have QR and NR are the same, so that's these 2 things here. Now, what if I know that P and M are both right angles? That doesn't tell me that they're congruent just yet, but I know that angle P has to be congruent to angle M because all right angles equal 90 degrees. So those have got to be the same. So now I have this part marked off. The other piece of information that I am given tells me about a midpoint. The R is in the middle of PM. So what does that tell you? Well, hopefully you remember midpoint means it cuts it up, which means that this part right here has got to be exactly the same size as that part right there. So I know that P to R is exactly the same size as R to M by the definition of midpoint. So that's this guy right here. So go back up and look at our to-do list. So far we have all 3 of the sides are congruent, and we have 1 pair of the angles are congruent. So we got to get these other 2 right here. Now we're not given any more information, which means that we got to get something from the picture. So if we go back and look at the picture, hopefully something's sticking out to you that right here and here, these have got to be congruent because they're vertical angles. So that's angle R has to be congruent to angle R by vertical angles. Okay. Almost done. We got 1 left. Think back to one of the theorems that we did a while ago that said if I know 2 angles in one triangle are congruent to 2 angles in another, then the third angles have to also be congruent. This was the third angle theorem. So I know angle Q has to be congruent to angle N by the third angle theorem. And that's it. We have checked everything off of our to-do list. So after I check all those 6 things off, then I know I can prove that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle MNR because all 6 corresponding parts are congruent. So, we got another one. What 6 things do we need to prove that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEC? So make our list again. Remember, all 3 corresponding sides and all 3 corresponding angles need to be the same. So let's do angles first. So if we look back to our congruent statement, angle A and D need to be the same. Angle B and angle E need to be the same. We need angle C and angle C to be the same. And then we got to do the same thing with sides. So AB and DE need to be the same. BC and EC need to be the same. And finally, AC and DC need to be the same. Now once we have, oh wait, this should be a C. Once we have all of those, then we know that those two triangles are congruent. So let's take a look at what they give us in this proof. Remember, we have our statements and our reasons. And they give us AD bisects BE. That doesn't cross anything off of our list just yet. BE bisects AD. That still doesn't cross anything off of our list. The next one, AB, is congruent to DE. This one does cross something off of our list. We need this guy. Right here, AB and DE. One of our 6 things down. And then finally, the last given is angle A is congruent to angle D. Again, this guy is on our list. So 2 out of the 6 things down. Okay, all these are givens. So they must have told us this whole bisect thing because we can find something else from it. So the first one says that AD, so if we look back in our picture right here, AD, this big long line here, bisects, which means it chops BE in half. So take BE and cut it in half with that AD. So what that means is that I cut that in half and I end up with this part and this part being the same size. So BC has to be congruent to CE by the definition of bisect. Remember when we were doing the proofs, bisect was like a buzzword that should ring a bell for something. And if you look, BC and CE being congruent are one of our 6 things that we need. So we can chop that off. Now the next one goes backwards. This says that BE bisects AD. So if we go back up here, BE chops AD in half. So this chop right here tells me that these guys are the same and these guys are the same. So AC is congruent to DC. For the same reason, definition of bisect. And that's awesome because that's one more thing off of our list. So, right now we have all 3 of our sides we know are the same, but we only know one angle pair. Commit to memory that anytime you have a bow tie, anytime you have a thing like this that kind of looks like a bow tie, you will always use vertical angles. So I know that angle C is congruent to angle C because of vertical angles. Vertical angles. And then you will always use the third angle theorem if you know 2 of the angles, just like we did in the last one. So I know these guys have to be the same because the other 2 angles were the same. So angle B is congruent to angle E by the third angle theorem. So this right there is all 6 of our things that we need to prove. So once we've proven all 6 of those things, we say, okay, this means the angle ABC is very much the same size as triangle DEC. And this is because of the same reason that we used up here. All 6 corresponding parts are congruent. All 6 corresponding parts are congruent. And that's it. You have several things to keep you busy for the rest of class. The first thing you need to do is the worksheet. This needs to be turned in to Mrs. Carroll. After you've done the worksheet, you have vocab that you can do. I want to say there's 2 words, but I don't remember. Look for the 4.3 words. And then you have IXL. I know there are 2 of those, but they're on Google Classroom. Have fun. Be good. I will see you tomorrow.